First, it's the challenge and the opportunity of encompassing Africa into our overall global strategy. It's very easy to have an Africa strategy we can discuss all day, and we're all practitioners in this field about Africa, but Africa needs to be integrated into our overall foreign policy vision, our overall foreign policy global dialogue. It's heartening that in recent years under Ambassador Carson and then Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, we've had this dialogue on a bilateral basis in our relationship with China about Africa, but we still don't have that with the major players. We've heard it underscored several times today, India's growing importance in Africa and likely to overtake China. We don't have a bilateral dialogue with India and China, and I underscore that with the fact that Prime Minister Modi is in Washington as we speak and sizing our relationship there. Speaking of other powers in Africa, not just the great powers, but regional powers, very often we look at these trade-offs synchronically, here and now, and we don't often enough think about them diachronically over time. And that often leads us, and I would argue, into some very short-term trade-offs. Ambassador Shin mentioned this morning about the number of Chinese deployments, et cetera, in Africa. That occurred because we made a decision back in 2008 to encourage China's involvement as a responsible stakeholder in the anti-piracy operations off the coast of Somalia. I recall distinctly being in a minority opinion at the time, raising questions about whether the trade-off was worth it. Now we have the answer 8 years later with China's first overseas base in Djibouti, the number of port visits in Africa, the deployments, and the first ever deployment during wartime of a Chinese warship, the Zhuzhou, in the Bay of Tripoli during the Libya crisis. So beware what you ask for. But other countries as well. Again, we failed to look at our relationships globally. We slapped sanctions on Russia and on specific individuals tied to the regime of Vladimir Putin, someone like Sergei Chemezov, for their involvement in the crisis in Crimea. Yet we don't look at the fact that Sergei, just to cite one person, has in the last 2 years invested, by my calculation, $8 billion in Africa. Somehow our sanctions we didn't look at how he moved into Rostec deals, not only acquiring mineral rights and infrastructure in Africa, but in the process also selling the Ugandan government half a dozen Su-30s. So the challenge of encompassing Africa in our global strategy.